Let's get started, okay? I think today the session on how boys and girls learn differently will be of interest and practical use to you. This is something I used to train parents in Singapore and other Asian countries, as well as working with teachers from the Ministry of Education. So I think here, if you can take out a notebook and really jot down some notes, I think they will serve you tremendously. And when you walk away from this short session this morning, I hope you can better understand your son, your daughter, so that you can more effectively nurture them. Now, the question is really not nature versus nurture. Rather, as my former partner, Michael Gurian, the founder of Gurian Institute, and Gurian Institute really is the expert in gender science, with the research findings validated across 30 cultures, validated across 30 cultures over the past 30 years. So we are not talking about subjective opinion. We are talking about scientific findings. So let's jump in. So the question is, how can we nurture the nature? That is powerful. And for many of my friends, and including my family as well, we spend a lot of money on our children's education, and yet we have not asked the question, how can we parents really effectively help our children maximize their potential based on their unique strengths? And we know from research that the male and the female brain really are different in terms of their functionality, in terms of how they work. And now, when you look at that, yes, both female and male brains are equally intelligent, yet they are intelligent in different ways. So let's jump in right now. First, I want to talk about the structure of the brain so that you now can really understand your sons and your daughters. First of all, when you look at the female brain and the male brain, look at the first area. This is called Corpus Callosum. You see the red area right in between the two hemispheres of the brain, the left brain and the right brain. Now this is really interesting because in the female brain, the corpus callosum, which is a massive network of nerve fiber forming connections, is up to 25% more. 25% more dense. So what does that mean? It really means that the female brain is so good at multitasking. And you can know, ladies, when you drive, right, you can do many things at the same time. You can look at the traffic in front, you can look at the rear view mirror, you can put on your lipstick, put on your powder, you can eat and drink at the same time, right? So this is called multitasking. The female brain is so superior in multitasking as compared to the male brain because the male brain doesn't have as many connections. So what does that mean? When you are talking to your son, okay, or in fact, whatever you are learning now applies to our relationship, okay, with your husband, with your wife, and so forth. If you can understand how the male brain works, that's powerful. That means when you talk to your son, please keep to one thing at a time. Same thing. I ask my wife to talk to me, not to really tell me too many things at the same time because my brain is not as powerful. I can't process so many things at the same time. So with your son, with your boys, so one thing at a time, really important. If you want to give them specific instruction, just one thing at a time. Also keep it short and concise, because later on I'll point out to you that the faculties in the male brain are not really designed for verbal expression. We are not as superior, okay? So that means when you work with your son, keep it short, keep it concise, one thing at a time, that's right. And now you can ask them, what did mommy tell you? Let your boy express and make sure they have understood. If you tell them too many things, right, they can't even process. They definitely cannot understand. Now let's move on to the next area. This is really interesting. Why do you think boys, usually 80% of them, cannot sit still? And even when I do my Zoom coaching with my male students, right? And you know what? They'll be like this. They're moving around. And you think they're like rapping. I say, okay. And I never judge because I understand how the male brain works. They'll be moving around, tapping the pencil or pen, okay? And just throwing things. And in class, definitely, they'll be making a paper aeroplane and throwing at the person in front. And well, you know what? That's the nature. Why is that? Because in the male brain, more blood flow, up to 15% of blood flows to the cerebellum, okay? The cerebellum is the doing center of the brain. And that's why when you look at your boys at home, they can't sit still. Usually they'll move around. And not only that, you've got to understand one thing. Boys occupy more space. And that is the problem in school, because when teachers don't understand how boys and girls are different in terms of the development and learning, boys will occupy more space. And the teacher said, why are you so rude, Tommy? You need to be polite and considerate of other people. You are too messy. You're taking up too much space. You're not tidy. They don't understand that boys need movement. Okay? And if you think about that, girls, no. Girls are very proper. They stick to their own confined space and they can work and attentively, because later on I'll talk about the differences in hormones as well, right? But boys, more blood flowing to the cerebellum, more blood flowing to the emotional processing center, amygdala. What does that mean? That means boys, they get aggressive and impulsive more easily. So if you are not careful, you are looking at your boy as a troublemaker when actually is in his nature to move around. There is one more very important point that you need to understand. There is 20% more spinal fluid flowing between his brain and his spine. So if he sits for a long time, it's really uncomfortable. Same thing for most guys, most men. We have to move around. We can't sit still for such a long time. Like in a meeting, we need to get up and get coffee, get drink, go to the toilet. So if you can understand this, that means you need to incorporate movement into your boys' learning. What does that mean? They can read when standing up. They don't need to sit down. The worst that could happen is sit down, okay? And I want you to behave properly. No, they can move around, they can recite something, they can read a speech while moving around. Why? What's the problem with them standing up and reading? I do that all the time. I even do coaching when I have to stand up with my students. So please understand. And second, strategies when they're learning vocabulary words, okay, or when they're learning spelling, get them to stand up. Stand up, really, literally, stand up. And you know what? If they're learning the word diarrhea, they can spell using the hand. They can spell D-I-A-R-R-H-O-E-A. They can do that, right? So this is something you can do with your boys. They need to stand up and move around. They can spell it big size, small size, and then now you can ask them to write down the spelling on paper so they can see, what we call building visual memory. And when they stand up, when they spell, ask them to read the word out loud or spell the alphabets out loud. So D, I, the first round, make it loud and big. Second round, make it small and quiet. Okay, so that is how you do it. And next thing is, if you want to encourage your boys to read more, okay, and you can just put books all over the house, but allow them space, like on the floor, on the carpet, on the rug, so they can just lie down and read. They can just use the space. That is the point, okay? Now, when you, at the same time, just one more thing, okay? And this is the strategy that I use with my students. And I've got so many male students who can't sit still, right? And so when they are doing something and you can give them a stress ball, okay? Now, I gave away all my stress balls to my students, but this is from Lucas, okay? So it's kind of funny, but this is what he can do. So if he's reading something, he can squeeze this thing. You got it? The stress ball. And that gives him movement rather than making the very annoying sound. You got it so far? So that is a strategy for you to keep in mind. Now let's talk about girls. Okay, with girls, they have verbal processing centers all over their two hemispheres. Ladies, you know that, right? So because you like to express, you like to talk. Now men are really not into that. So we are not really good communicators to the extent that women are. Once again, I'm generalizing. I'm not stereotyping. I'm just sharing with you the research findings. So in fact, for example, when you look at a 3-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy, that girl has 3 times the size of vocabulary words as the boy. That is powerful. So what does that mean is girls are much more superior in terms of expressions, in terms of verbal processing. That's why you look at girls, usually they excel more in language, okay? And they can pick up words faster, they can pick up languages faster. Whereas boys are usually better at abstract thinking, okay? Or spatial processing. That means boys usually are more comfortable with mathematics and physics because these are abstract concepts, whereas girls are not as comfortable. The good news though is girls have been catching up. And of course, as parents and educators, we have to encourage girls not to be limited in their own belief that, oh, I can't do well, this is too hard. Yet there are strategies definitely for us to use to help girls improve in those areas. And I'll talk about that very quickly. So I just want to highlight that here, referring to my notes, because more energy, more areas in the girl's brain, okay, in the female brain are devoted to verbal processing and not as much to spatial mechanical learning. That's why if you really ask, and there are many studies that show that women are not as comfortable reading maps, right? Come on, ladies, you ask yourself, why? Because this is a spatial mechanical activity. Whereas for men, normally they look at it and they have a very good sense of direction and bearing, okay? So that means with girls, now how can we help them improve in mathematics as well as physics? Very important. That is to use descriptive, because once again, the female brain is more in tune with words and expressions. So if you, yes, exactly, if you ask the girls to, okay, memorize the formula in physics, okay, the formula for speed is distance over time. They say, what? And this is a really simple formula. But if you can explain to them, it works like this, okay? Imagine your teacher is speaking so fast that the sound of speed from your teacher's mouth is 1,000 meters per second, okay? And that means what? If your teacher has spoken for 5 seconds, so how many words has your teacher spoken? And now if you use that concept, it's easier for a girl to understand. And that's my point, okay? Like when I teach my students fraction, if you use the fraction like 3/8, 11/15, they may not be able to see. But if I literally draw a pie or pizza and I cut it into, for example, 15 slices, and now I show to them, you take out 3 slices, what is that fraction? It's easy for them to understand. That is a secret to helping girls understand abstract concepts. Because when they understand, when they get a taste of success, now at least they're more interested in the subject. You don't want them to be turned off. Oh my gosh, this is too hard. I don't understand, I don't get it. And then they lose interest and motivation. Another thing you can do is play more puzzles with them. Okay, even like when they're younger, Lego blocks, wonderful tool to build spatial processing abilities. Play more brain teasers with them. So here, a lot of brain teasers are mathematical in nature or really abstract in thinking. So play more with them, and then you have family fun At the same time, actually you're training them to develop that spatial analytical skills. Another thing is go outdoor, play balls, right? Because now they have to judge distance, and boys usually are more, again, in tune with the distance, because before, when we used to live in the caves, when we had to hunt, we had to gauge how fast the animal was moving, right? And how far, so we could throw a spear. So the point is, go out, play frisbee with your girl, play ball, bounce the ball, play basketball, soccer, whatever you can get them to move around. That's going to help them with the, again, spatial development. Are we good so far? I hope here this is making sense. At the same time, you give me a thumbs up if you have, if you really follow. I'm trying to make this as simple and concise as possible. Now, let me get into another really interesting area, okay? If you look at your boys, and I got a lot of complaints from teachers in schools, and that is they say, my gosh, they are like, I'm talking, they're not looking at me, or they're looking out the window, or it looks like they're like this. Yes, I understand. Have you had that experience before when you're trying to talk to your son, or maybe even your husband, okay? And he's like, he's spacing out, he's zooming out. Well, why is that? Okay, this is the key. The male brain tends to renew or re-energize itself by going into rest state. This is what we call rest state in neuroscience. Well, you know when you look at your husband, okay, as my wife looks at me, or when you look at your boys, you know what rest state looks like. It's simply like, that is rest state. That means they are gone mentally. Okay, they have zoomed out. So if you try to tell them something at that moment, good luck. No, because they are now trying to rest and re-energize the male brain. And the wonderful thing, the powerful thing about the female brain is it doesn't require the rest state. And in fact, the female brain is really occupied and busy almost all the time. Even when ladies are sleeping, right? The brain is still working, like maybe subconsciously thinking about what to cook tomorrow, what to do with the kids, and so forth. So now, I want to share with you very quickly, because before we wrap this up, I want to share with you the 3 conditions that you can now start adopting, or 3 conditions that you can use to at least help your son and your girl become more motivated in learning. So let's jump in. Number 1, the first condition is called survival. I'm not talking about physical survival, like at the moment we're dealing with this pandemic. No, we are talking about emotional well-being. Now, if your son or your girl doesn't feel safe, doesn't feel secure when they are learning in the classroom or at home, usually they get turned off. So be careful about that. What does it mean? If parents are really harsh and overly critical or really judgmental, it's very hard to motivate a child to learn. Now, the second point is novelty. Now, let me show you. Okay, so once again, the first one is what? Survival. You've got to pay attention to how safe your child feels and even how loved they feel even when they're making mistakes. The second is right here, novelty. Novelty means new, something new. So in order to keep your child engaged, you've got to have new things, new activities. It can't be the same thing all the time, okay? So come up with creative ideas, maybe get them to stand up, do some spelling in the air, or read out loud with them if you have younger boys, okay? That is very good. Or tell them stories. So that's how you engage them. And number 3, okay, this is also very important. This is called relevance. The third condition is relevance. They will ask you, why? Why do I need to learn this? And here's the interesting finding. If you can explain to them and really point them to the why. This is why you need to do well. This is why you need to do well, for example, in algebra, because the next time when you want to do well in your triple science, especially physics, if you do well in mathematics, it'll make your life easier. Okay, so you want to do that. Or like with my student, if, for example, one of my students is interested in going to Canada to study, okay, that's great. Then now is a good opportunity for me to really coach him in terms of why he needs to improve his communication skills, why he needs to improve in his interpersonal skills, because next time when he goes to Canada, right, he has to get along with people, he has to work with strangers from the beginning, he has to express in order to do well or do better in school. So that is called relevance. That is the why. Finally, when you look at boys and girls, you say, oh my gosh, he is so impulsive. Again, it applies to men as well, because that's how the male brain is geared. Why? Because now the last area I want to just talk about is the differences in hormone. The male brain is driven by what? You've heard this before, testosterone. Okay, testosterone. And this is an aggression hormone. It makes the male brain, the boy or the man, more aggressive. Essentially, it puts the male brain in fight or flight. That means they want to fly away. What that means is when you are now talking to your son and even your husband in a heated argument, it's better to take a time out. Okay, because at that instance, usually what happens is the boy will walk away, the boy will retreat, because this is the flight, right? So he said, it's okay, we're going to just time out and just cool off. We'll talk about this later on this afternoon after lunch. So for you, it satisfies the need to talk, to discuss, ladies. Got it? For the boy or the man, well, at least let them have a chance to cool off. So that is much more effective. And another thing is because of this aggression hormone, it is a really effective strategy to use a healthy competition to motivate boys. Like I would do this. Okay, you guys, let's form teams. Okay, so let's see who can get a higher score. And we're going to play some learning games. So boys would love that. They want to compete. So as long as you don't make a judgment or you don't criticize when they're not doing as well, that is a fun challenge for them. So far so good. Now finally and lastly, the female brain has more of what? Oxytocin. Oxytocin is a befriending and tending chemical. That means here, girls in class, they sit there and they look at the teacher because they want the approval, the affection, the acceptance from teacher, but it doesn't mean they are learning. So oxytocin actually makes the female brain want to please other people. You have to be careful. With your daughter, you have to say, you know what, your job is not to make other people happy, because you don't want them to always try to please other people at their expense. Instead, you can say to them, yes, we want to be helpful, we want to be compassionate, but your life purpose is not to please other people or impress other boys. So instead, if you can use that concept, okay, and ask them to, for example, express themselves. And one very powerful technique is journaling. I always encourage my female students to journal so they can express the feelings. This is an outlet. Whether it's good or not so good, it doesn't matter. Express the feelings in writing. Very powerful. It's called expressive writing. So at least you don't want them to have all the feelings hidden inside and they have no one to talk to. Then they get themselves into depression and in some cases even developing the tendency for suicide. So no, you don't want that. You want to maintain a really healthy balance. And with that, okay, I hope this short session has been of use to you. And normally I train teachers and parents in a 2-day session. And I'm just highlighting to you those really vital differences. Once again, our job is not to discriminate or stereotype. Our job is to use whatever science has taught us so that we become better educators. And with that, we become the best parents that we know we can be. So please try them out and let me know how that goes. And hopefully we have another opportunity to share. With that, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you very much for joining me, and have a fantastic day ahead. Thank you.